Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Jurevicius, and I'm a illustrator, director, designer, part-time potter, and the creator and production designer of Scarygirl. This is me, very innocent, how it all began, how we were maybe feeling quite a few years ago, and this is kind of maybe a little bit how a lot of us might be feeling now, and after going through lots of personal things, not only worldwide, but just even on a work level. Coming out of a feature film, that's kind of how I'm feeling a little bit. So here's me before and how it's going now. So I grew up in a very, very small town called Mount Barker, but I was actually born in an even smaller town called Bordertown, which is actually a real name. It's on the border of South Australia and Victoria, and there's not a lot going on there, but it is notable for its famous albino kangaroos, this lightning bolt clock, and the birthplace of one of the Prime Ministers of Australia, Bob Hawke, who was most notably, infamously known for being able to drink a lot of beer. So yes, that's where I was born and spent a couple of years of my life. Then, as time went on, my family moved to a place called Mount Gambier, which is an area that has a giant lake. It's called the Blue Lake. It's a mysterious lake that is an extinct volcano, and the water inside changes color throughout the year. They say it's bottomless, but that's probably impossible. But here is me and my brother. We're living in Mount Gambier at this time. This is the 80s, and my brother and I, we actually work together a lot. He's a director and a musician, and here's me drawing, and my brother looking over my shoulder at my drawing. So we've collaborated for many, many years, and we've never really fought at all either. We've had such a good working relationship. So when I was very young, I used to get up extremely early before everyone else. I'd have a bowl of cereal. It was probably something crazy like Fruit Loops or whatever. So yeah, full of sugar. And I would get up and watch cartoons in the morning. I was obsessed with getting up early and watching cartoons. Some of the influences that I had on a sort of an animation level was Speed Racer. And then there was Mighty Mouse, the really old version of Mighty Mouse. I also loved this character called Morph, which was a British Aardman series, and it was a beautiful kind of stop motion series. I was also influenced by like super weird stuff like HR Puffin stuff, which is a sort of a psychedelic, strange thing created by Marty Croft. It's very weird and wonderful. And on top of that, I was also really into the original old black and white Flash Gordon series. It was just such an amazing series for me as a young kid. When I was also quite young, in the late 70s, early 80s, my dad placed a lot of his pottery and sculptures around the house. So he was at the time really obsessed with, I suppose you could say, family-like images on pots. A lot of faces, a lot of representations of the family in his pot. So as a little kid, these were almost the same size as me walking around. So I kind of had this very strange view of the world. It was quite surreal, maybe slightly traumatizing, but who knows? I seem to have turned out relatively okay. Here's me on my dad's pottery wheel. I was actually obsessed with pottery back then, and more of my dad's pots. Lots and lots of faces, baby faces, kind of abstract faces. I think a lot of this really influenced my art going forward, and you can probably see some of this sort of sculptural qualities in some of my toy designs and also my illustration work. This is my very first car. It was a 1970 Ford Capri. The reason why I show you this is because it was the vehicle that I drove every day to university in. It was a car that I pretty much drove my first girlfriend around in. And it was my kind of, I suppose, a vehicle that shielded me from various issues in life. I tended to be a little bit kind of awkward and shy at university. I was going through kind of just some thoughts about, how I felt with identity, how I kind of just related to the world in general. And so often after classes, I would like eat or I'd sleep in the back of the car, just a nap, just to kind of get away from things. And so, yeah, it was a very special car for me during those university days. Now, while I was at university, I had a lecturer. He's no longer with us anymore, but he was a fantastic lecturer called John Siao, and I had him in illustration for 2 years, and his work was watercolors, and it was pen sketches. I wasn't so much influenced by necessarily his style, but I was influenced by just his take on illustration in general and his encouragement. And I think that was something that was really important to me, was to be guided going straight from high school into university. I think I was probably quite naive to how university was compared to high school. And John was actually the first person that helped me get work while I was actually studying. So in my second year, he approached me and he knew that I was into kind of religious stories. He knew that I was into mythology. And there was a publisher that was looking for someone who had those interests, who could sort of interpret sort of a religious story, but in an alternate kind of slightly weird way. And John recommended me, and I ended up for 2 years during university working on kids' books that were religious in nature, but that also helped me get into doing book illustration after I graduated, and also into editorial work. And so after I graduated university, I was determined to be an editorial illustrator. There was something about editorial illustration that appealed to me. It was possibly the fact that I was able to interpret, say, dry information and make it my own, reinterpret text. It was a great way of telling an alternate story based on the words that I was reading in the magazines. And so I did a lot of illustration work for business magazines, technology magazines, including Wired magazine, the Wall Street Journal, a lot of Australian business-related magazines. And so this was just some of the work that I was doing during that time. So this is way back in the late 90s into the early 2000s. And during that time, I was also experimenting with Flash animation. So I was playing around with Flash. I was creating very small, slightly naive animated projects. I ended up working a bit as a freelancer for the ABC, working on some mythology projects relating to Greek fairy tales. There was another story that I was doing, which was my own personal story that they let me do that had a game involved in it. So yeah, it was was quite an interesting time, and Flash was really big at the time. It was probably, again, the 2000, early 2000s, that I was doing this. And eventually I also got into toy design. And so I was doing a lot of freelance work with Hasbro. And Hasbro's quite at the time, it was quite interesting. They had this division which was an experimental department that they would take different IPs that had been developed in the past, and there was a small group of us who would look at this work and try and reinterpret it, try and make it for a new generation. Maybe look at what was great about the original IP and how that could be pushed to maybe a modern context. And during that time, I worked on Mr. Potato Head, Weebles, Play-Doh, and I was also involved in the redesign of Furby, which in the end kind of almost looks like the original Furby, but as with all kind of design iterations, you tend to kind of push it to the extreme, only to come back to kind of maybe a slightly more refined version of the original. So with the way that I work, I have an interesting kind of method of giving myself 3 tasks, I suppose. So anytime I'm starting a project, mostly personal projects, I look at what I'm obsessed with, something that really interests me. I look at something that's personal, that I love, that I have a connection to, and then after that, I wrap that up with what would the story be of this. And so I look at those 3 things, and I kind of make that as a bit of a rule for myself. And so, as far as obsessions go, I have many, many obsessions, and a lot of these obsessions turn into projects. Sometimes just one-offs. Other times they become kind of an obsession that lasts years and years and years. One of these obsessions is owls. I'm absolutely obsessed with owls, and so over the course of many, many years, I've done hundreds of owl-related projects. And if it's not an owl-related project, then I am doing or I'm telling a client, can I include an owl in it? And often the client is like, yes, go ahead, include an owl, even if it's hidden somewhere. So I've done stuff for MTV. I've done tattoos for people. I've worked on animated shows, my own show called Paleta, which is all about owls. I even did a project for IKEA where I actually wanted to do a rabbit, but they actually came to me and said, no, we want you to do an owl. And so this green glass owl was formed with IKEA. I've also worked on preschool shows about owls, lots of toys, and this toy here, the one in the middle, is a one for a Japanese toy manufacturer. And so I'm always about owls. Even now, even with the projects I do with Scarygirl, you'll always see an owl somewhere. The other thing I'm obsessed with is walking. And so I love drawing people walking or creatures walking, often in a sideways pose. And so, these are some of the illustrations that I've been doing. These are pen and pencil illustrations, people walking, often in the same direction, sideways. All these drawings here are, again, pen and pencil. This was a large kind of mural concept that turned into like a puzzle. It turned into a limited edition print, but this is the original pencil sketch for it. It's called Future Normal. It was something that I was doing during the pandemic, and this is kind of how it visually turned out in the digital version. But again, just people walking. It's just a weird obsession of mine. Another obsession of mine when I went to Lithuania was this cake called Shakotis. And it looks like this. It's this giant, quite kind of bland, but very, very interesting looking cake. And it's this spiky kind of pancake-like texture, great with a coffee or tea, but probably not the tastiest when you eat it on its own, and not very good for you either. I think it has 60 eggs, sugar, and butter and flour, and that's about it. But because I got so obsessed with it, I wanted to do my own series of sculptures or sculpture concepts that were inspired by Shakotis. So these kind of like tower-like objects were inspired by this cake. And I got really obsessed with this. I ended up doing probably, I don't know, maybe 80 of these drawings, all inspired by the Shakotis, and also combined with owls. So there's a lot of owl-like iconography, these images. These are little 1-inch minifigures, also inspired from the Shakotis. And then on top of this, I created a book called Junction, and Junction has various scenes in it where there's these kind of stalagmite objects that are inspired from the Shakotis cake. The other thing that I love and am inspired by is pottery. This obviously goes back to my father's pottery and sculpture, but I love to draw pots. I love to create my own versions of pottery. These are pencil sketches. This is digital work. These sort of pottery still lives. I love to do quick sketches of people doing pottery. And I even have created a short film based on my book Junction, which features a section in it talking about my father's pottery studio and kind of my fantasy version of that. And you can see it in this slide here.
After breakfast, I walked to my parents' ceramic studio to make a change token. I remember the studio being hot, dusty, and smelling of dark chocolate and oranges.
So yes, that was just a little section of Junction. And then you can see here I'm doing my own pottery. I like to make modular pottery. Again, something that was influenced from my father. These pots can also represent people as well. And I've done a series of illustrations where I've used these as sort of modular shapes that can be turned into characters. And so I'm always extending and expanding my obsessions into longer projects. With the owls, with walking, and with pottery, I'm always turning it into something else. Another thing that I'm obsessed with is faces. And again, I like to draw faces in profiles, not all the time, but I get very, very obsessed with drawing faces. And so I do a lot of repetition of faces. Often I will draw faces on vomit bags in airlines and then leave these in magazines or in the front pocket of the chair for a little gift or a surprise for people who are reading the magazines. If I'm in hotels, I'll just doodle away drawing faces. I even set myself a goal of drawing a face a day of my of people that have inspired me or I'm interested in regards to music. And so I did a whole pile of faces based on musicians, which then turned into an exhibition of faces for various galleries. And while I was doing this, someone approached me and asked if I could let them do a book of all these faces. And so there's a book of all these musicians called Sound Vision, which is a play on the David Bowie song. Now, because I push really hard on my colored pencils, I got obsessed with broken pencil leads, another spin-off of a project. And so the pencils I use, I love Prismacolor. They're my favorite pencil. Unfortunately, they do get a bit soft, and I do break the leads often, but it's just the pencil that I go to all the time. I just really am obsessed with this pencil. And so every time a lead breaks, I turn it into an image. So I draw these black and white sketches, and then I use the colored pencil leads to kind of decorate the image or enhance the image in some ways. Sometimes the pencil leads inspire the image. So, for instance, these red broken pencil leads became the fangs of Dracula. One of my favorite pencils is the Chartreuse pencil. I used it so much that I had to like sharpen both ends, and it's sadly it's died, but I wanted to not just throw it away, but give it a respectful burial. So I've created this piece here, which is the kind of the last days of this Chartreuse pencil. So this all leads into Scarygirl. All my obsessions, all my influences, my past really leads into something that I became quite obsessed with and has stuck with me for over 21 years now. And Scarygirl has been this ongoing project, this obsession, and yeah, I just haven't been able to shake it. Now, Scarygirl initially came from this interest and obsession from ocean life and pirates. And when I was young, I loved a lot of really old films like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the old Peter Pan film. I really loved Ray Harryhausen films that related to the ocean and pirates. The Goonies came a bit later, but again, it was all related to kind of pirates and the ocean. One of the really obsessive things that I loved was this Ray Harryhausen animation on Jason and the Argonauts. It was just so good, such a good kind of inspiration. I even randomly met Ray Harryhausen once in London about 20 years ago, maybe even longer than that, 24 years ago, and it was just by accident. I was at a opening for a big store in London called Forbidden Planet, and I was looking at his work, and I remember quite loudly saying to my friend, "Wow, I love these Ray Harryhausen kind of collectibles. When did he die?" And then standing right behind me was Ray Harryhausen at this opening, and I turned around and sort of looked at him, and I was very much like, "You're very much alive, aren't you?" So, yeah, it was quite an amazing thing to meet, one of your obsessions, I would say. Another thing that I was really into, especially in the early to mid 80s, was this game here called Octopus, and this is an early Nintendo game. And this character, the octopus, became a real obsession to me. It was something where I was always thinking about, and it became essentially kind of the inspiration for a character later on in the Scarygirl world. Now, one of the things that's really personal to me that I love, and this is the sort of the second step in my ideas, is my daughter. And my daughter's name's Archie, and Archie is also the name of Scarygirl. So the kind of the personality and the and just the general vibes of my daughter were the big inspiration for the character of Scarygirl. And they're both the same age, and they've both grown up essentially together. I would say that Scarygirl is almost like my fourth child, but inspired by the personality of Archie. And this is my daughter here. She is almost 22, but yeah, she's been such an interesting character. She's the middle child, kind of very chatty, super friendly, outgoing, and will try anything. And it's a little bit like Scarygirl. Scarygirl will try anything. Is always ready to, go into an adventure. So during this time, when I was sort of developing up the idea of Scarygirl, and I'd been working up various concepts initially for an actual Flash game, I received a kind of mystery phone call from a guy in Hong Kong, and he was asking me, and he'd been following my work online because I'd been obsessively posting it, and he said, did I want to design toys for adults? And, I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. But he sent me a box of toys featuring very early toys from various Hong Kong and Japanese designers, as well as a toy from Cause that had just come out. And this was kind of like 2001, and we ended up collaborating together on toys. And the first character that we ended up doing was Scarygirl, and this is the very, very first toy that came out. It's quite kind of, I suppose, naive in some ways, and it's the very early representation of Scarygirl. And at the time, Scarygirl had a sidekick toy cat, this sort of robotic cat that used to follow her around. This version of Scarygirl also came out about a year later. Notably, it has a little peace stub on it. That's, like 20 years ago. And unfortunately, things aren't that peaceful at the moment in the world. But it was an interesting piece that was designed, and I was quite interested in creating different motifs on Scarygirl's shirts. Other toys that I ended up developing over the years with different partners. This was with Kid Robot. This is a Scarygirl series called City Folk. There were large vinyl figures that were all limited edition. Dr. Maybe, there was Tree Dweller. These characters were called Swamp Folk on the left. On the right, on the top, there's a series of Japanese vinyl toys, very different interpretations of Scarygirl and her friends. And then on the bottom of that, there's Bunny Guru, which has in some ways become almost the most popular character from the series. And we've done a lot of things with Bunny Guru over the years. And I'm hoping to kind of develop Bunny Guru's story a bit more in maybe in a TV series, but we'll see. But over the years, I've done a lot of figures, a lot of toys that I've designed, and a lot of partners that I've worked with, and it's been really interesting, really rewarding. It's really fun to kind of create toys, and I don't know, it just takes me back to, I suppose, being a kid, but also the collector in me. All these things are limited edition. A lot of them are blind box, so they have a really good sense of surprise about them as well. Now, Scarygirl has also been interpreted in multiple ways. I mean, I've designed Scarygirl and worked with various people to do quite interesting silhouettes of her. She's been on robots. She's been a stop motion puppet that was designed by the people who did Coraline. I've dressed up myself as Scarygirl. The Singapore Lion's been a Scarygirl version. Other people have interpreted Scarygirl as tattoos. This is not my design. It was someone just taking Scarygirl and making it their own. People like Gemma Carell and Sean Tan and Rob Rieger, they've done their versions of Scarygirl. In some ways, it's been a little bit of I suppose, almost an open source style world and characters where different collaborators that I've worked with have reinterpreted Scarygirl. And you can see here over the years that Scarygirl's silhouette has changed, but it's still quite distinct as far as it doesn't matter what era of Scarygirl you look at. You can recognize common elements throughout. And the silhouette is, so important for a recognition tool. And you can see that, the hair definitely has a similarity. There's the hat, the hook, the skirt. All these elements are very, very similar, even though the shapes are changing over the years. And the next thing that I add, obviously, to all my things, and I've shown in the past, is that story is a really important thing. And the story that I really wanted to tell for Scarygirl in a very basic way is family. What is family? What's it mean to seek out family? Does family mean being blood related, or does it mean the friends we have? What is family and the journey of family? And so in order to kind of investigate that, it was a good idea to kind of put it into a comic form. And so every week I would create a wordless comic, and that comic would go in an insert inside a Hong Kong-based magazine called Milk Magazine. And the magazine inside was called Playground. And Playground magazine featured a lot of pop culture stuff, sneakers, toys, and every week also a comic that I would do. And this comic was the basis, essentially, for the initial story of Scarygirl's journey. And it was an interesting comic because a lot of people would interpret their own story to it. They would insert their own words. They would maybe think about what would the voices sound like, what would the plot be, because the plot was quite kind of vague in some ways, but it did have a driving force of the main character heading towards a mysterious city. Now, during this time, around late 2003, early 2004, I met up with Sophie Byrne, and Sophie was coming from Passion Pictures UK, and she was relocating back to Australia, and she was involved in the early Gorillaz music videos. She also did she was the producer of the Lost Thing for Sean Tan, the short film, and she started up Passion Pictures Australia, which then and now recently has become Highly Spirited. And we got together, and she was asking about the toys, the comic. She could see something in it that she thought would make a great maybe TV series. Could be a game, could be a film. At the time, it wasn't a lockdown idea, but it was something that she was keen to explore. And so we ended up collaborating together, and essentially she's been with me. She's been the main producer of all the Scarygirl stuff ever since essentially 2004. And while I was thinking about what was next for Scarygirl, and when Sophie and I were discussing, should it be a TV series? Should it be a film? We did settle on a film, but while that was happening, I was working on a reimagining of the early comic. And so I re-illustrated the Scarygirl graphic novel. Again, still silent except with sound effects. And the Scarygirl novel was around 2008, and it was a more detailed interpretation of her journey. And you can see here some of the wordless panels. Her initial story is that she's dumped at a peninsula with a pile of trash, and she's found by this octopus who dresses her, raises her up, builds her a house. And during this time, she has a vision that's given to her by this rabbit called Bunny Guru, and the vision is to head to a city, she'll find the answers to what she's looking for, maybe where she came from in this kind of glorious city of light. And so she goes on this journey, and the journey isn't as easy as she thinks, including where she's captured by Tree Dweller and given to the Tree of Knowledge. And the Tree of Knowledge is this tree that will answer any question that you have. So it's great for Scarygirl. She's like, wow, I can find out the mysteries of my past. Unfortunately, the payment for that is to eat your brain. So you know the answers for about 1 minute, and then your brain's eaten. So anyway, that doesn't work out to be so good for Scarygirl, and she's rescued, and they head to the city. And the city in the graphic novel is actually not all that it seems. It's on the outset, it's all a facade. The City of Light is actually something much more devious, and there's really a plan all along to capture Blister the octopus, and also to do away with Scarygirl. And so they get chased through the city and end up in this underwater cavern where they meet the mysterious Dr. Maybe. So these is just various highlights from the book. But this all led to a game, and games were a big part of the Scarygirl kind of journey during sort of 2007 to 2012. And the first game that we did was this really extensive Flash game. It was quite a task, because it wasn't just a couple of different levels. It was a massive amount of levels created with some really talented programmers from a company called Touch My Pixel, and this game became really popular online. It ended up getting about 1.5 million players. It became this quite kind of nostalgic game for people now who, unfortunately, Flash isn't supported, so they have to go and hunt it down at a Flash emulation site, sort of an archive site for Flash games. But all the story of this game was loosely based on the graphic novel, and it was the journey of Scarygirl to find her past and to find Dr. Maybe. And because of the success of this game and the interest that it generated, we were approached by another company who wanted to make an indie PlayStation and Xbox game. And this was a very different take on Scarygirl. It was something that, again, was that kind of open source storytelling direction, where the premise of the story was that Scarygirl was saving Tree Dweller, who in the comics was actually bad, but in the in this game, for instance, is actually good. And she's been captured and become sick, and because of that, the world is starting to be infected by various rogue plants and animals, because Tree Dweller isn't in control of the forest anymore. And this game was quite an interesting challenge. A lot of it was done in the winter in Wisconsin. So there was a small game company that I went over and spent many months working with. And it was a real challenge, but a really big learning experience. And then from here, on the game side of things, I ended up working for about a year with a company based in Toronto called Darkslope. And Darkslope wanted to create their first VR free roam game, which could feature up to 8 players, that had the Scarygirl world, but was a grown-up version of that. And so this challenge to do Scarygirl in this way it was a sort of in unknown territory. Nobody had actually done in our group done a free roam VR game, and it was very, very early days for free roam. And so essentially 8 players can move around in a space the size of a tennis court, and you have to tell a story and create kind of an interactive experience for about 25 minutes in this really unusual world. And you become essentially an avatar. You become one of Scarygirl's clones. And so Scarygirl becomes the leader, and then you follow her through this adventure, kind of healing plants, going around and drawing out infection from various rogue creatures. And in the end, you need to destroy this large Dr. Maybe machine who is pumping toxic goo throughout the environment. So again, another interesting take on Scarygirl, a different way of interpreting, and again, an interesting challenge and an exciting thing to be part of. Now, during all this time, the film was in script development, in visual development. We were playing around with different directions, and we really kind of had to hone down, well, what would the film story be? In the past, it was a comic, and the comic had a different storyline. The online game also had a different storyline, as well as the console game, the VR game, and then eventually the film. What elements of those first 4 mediums did we want to tell in the film? And I color coded this so that you can see how we picked the different elements and we put those elements into the film. And so essentially with the film, she's washed up on a beach. She's raised by an octopus. She travels to a city to save an octopus, which is her dad. She meets a good version of Tree Dweller who helps her on a journey. And then the final thing is that she has a conflict in the city and overcomes Dr. Maybe, her other father. And so they were the kind of the 5 beats for the story. And I didn't end up writing the script, but these beats and all these influences were essentially given to the writers to look at, interpret, and make into a script. Now, we didn't go the studio route with Scarygirl. Scarygirl is an indie feature, and if you've ever made an indie feature, it's very, very hard, especially on an ultra limited budget with very tight deadlines to make the film. And so we had many stops and starts throughout the years, over the course of, over 10 years to make to get it financed. We had the potential to get it financed about 3 times, but circumstances affected it getting money. There were certain delays. There were the occasional person going to prison, but that's another story. But there was a lot of challenges to get the film made, and so because we wanted it to be all Australian, with all Australian voices, with no outsourcing. So the studio who helped produce it was highly spirited and like a photon creative. They got together, and through the collaboration of Screen Australia, Film Victoria, Screen Queensland, South Australian Film Corp, Madman, who's our distributor in Australia, Pink Parrot, who's our worldwide sales agent, and as well as Alcyon, who's a film finance company in Australia. All of these things were cobbled together to create the finance for us to be able to start the film, and it was really amazing. We were delayed a bit, and I remember just working away on other projects, and then suddenly getting the call that in 2 weeks we're starting. And so quickly jumped on board with a team that I'd actually not met before, and I became the production designer and the creative consultant on the project, and it was this really amazing process of dealing with a group of people that I hadn't met, and that we were going to collaborate for the next 2 years. And so it was a little bit like dating, you could say. There was this sort of moment of kind of what do you like? What's your humor like? What's your what's your personality like? And it took a little bit to gel together, but we ended up creating this very strong bond. And in the end, we really want to collaborate on future projects. I think it's the relationship we ended up bonding once the film had been complete. Just the bond, the family atmosphere was very evident, and the group was very small as well. The team was tiny. The art department that was purely doing concepts and working with me on designs and art and background and everything was only 4 people all up. We had a very small team of VFX artists, essentially one VFX artist for the whole team. A small number of animators, about 12. Every single person is known to everybody in the team, and it was part of the joy of being indie. It was very hard because of the circumstances that we're under, but the kind of the joy of being a family was fantastic. And so my process throughout the film tends to be quite analog to begin with. I love to just doodle away in my sketchbook. I work a lot in pen. I love to just create loose concepts about the world. And so I read the script and then went through the script, creating these rough doodles of what I would see as potential characters, potential worlds, and sort of looking at the themes and the ideas that I could bring to the script and to the rest of the art team. And so these are all sketches that some concepts made it into the film, others didn't. Often, once I've done the very loose pen sketches, I may work a bit more detailed. And here I worked in pencil, just doing more detailed images of how I saw some of the key set pieces. And so here's a place called the Bower at the top, and also Arky's sort of view of the city as she emerges from a tunnel. This is another pencil sketch of Bunny Guru and Scarygirl, or Arky, and Egg. They've crash landed the ship into a forest of cyclamens. Other times I'll work in different mediums. This is a pen and watercolor, just to kind of, again, explore the different story elements from the script. Some of these never make it into the film, but it's just a great sort of inspiration pieces for the other artists. These are pen and pencil sketches that are kind of inspired from the script, looking at ways of just interpreting kind of vehicles and kind of iconic little set pieces that could potentially feature in the film. And then from here, what I tend to do is refine these images. And so I bring them into kind of the digital space. And so this is just some of the, I suppose, the production design work that I was doing. I tend to kind of take those original roughs and clean them up a bit. This is this version of the Bower and Blister's cave. Some paint overs for this area as well. because it's such a small team, we're doing concepts for like what the VFX might look like. And so there was a lot of like paint overs and style frames based on, visual effects, and then character design. And for all the characters, I did the initial pass for all the characters in the film. And a lot of that was then given to another artist to kind of refine and help us do poses. And then that was brought back to me again, who would then look at those poses and look at the models and readjust them. So there was a lot of back and forth between modelers and myself and another person helping with the technical aspects of the design. These are more production design bits and pieces that I was working on, interpretations of an area called the Yellow Onion, a paint over. I did a lot of 2D work on the film, including like labels for bottles, posters. There was a whole 2D sequence that I did all the style frames for, and essentially broke down the pieces to be animated in Toon Boom. This was like a flashback sequence on the right, where Dr. Maybe tells a kind of half truth, half lie to Archie when she's asking him where did she come from. And on top of these 2D things, I got to have this really fun moment of illustrating all the main actors. They're almost like little vignettes of what could be happening in their life post film story. And so it was really fun to kind of illustrate just these little stills for the credit sequence. And I love this one of Sam Neill at the bottom left. He's surrounded by these creatures called squigglers, and he's been turned into half a squiggler. He's there, landed on an island, thinking he's getting away from it all, but the island's actually full of these squigglers that he hates. Now, I just want to show you just this next slide. It's a short sequence from Scarygirl, just to give you an idea of and a teaser of the film.
Why, hello, little girl. Are you lost?
No. I'm just waiting for my friends.
Friends? Oh, we can be friends with you. And with your tentacle.
Let go of my tentacle!
Tentacle?
Huggy.
Ooh, is that a tentacle?
Mind your own business. She's mine.
Yeah, mind your own business.
Oh, stop it. You were never a part of this. I've been here the whole time.
Sorry.
Get back here. Hey, excuse me. Wait. Excuse me. Wait. Calm down, little girl. We don't bite.
Thanks, Bunny.
So there you go. So that's the a little teaser of the Scarygirl film. It's a section where she's arrived in the city, and a character called Bug-Eye has seen Archie's tentacle, and tentacles in the city are sort of rare and if you give them to certain people, you get cash for them. And Archie happened to have a tentacle that's been inherited from her father, an octopus. And Bug-Eye chases her through the city, and because Archie's quite dexterous, she escapes with the help of Bunny Guru and Egg. And so this last slide that I want to show you is some posters. The poster on the left is the original poster for Australia, but it's now showing in various countries, in various cinemas around the world. It's in Italy. It's called something else. It's called Archie, and I think the Magic Lights, or the Magic of Lights. There's posters from Ukraine, the Netherlands, Eastern Europe, and hopefully we will know about some sort of distribution in North America. So we're just waiting on that. In Latin America, it's on HBO Max. And was doing very well on HBO Max. And it's also being shown in the Baltic region as well. So Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which is really something that's close to my heart, because my grandparents both came from the Baltics. They escaped the Baltics during the 40s, when there was war was going on, and they ended up in a refugee camp, and then eventually ended up in Australia as refugees. And the fact that it's now being shown, the film's now being shown in Lithuania and Estonia this week, and then Latvia early next year, it's just something that's really dear to my heart and really personal. So anyway, that's the little journey of Scarygirl, and I hope that you get to see it. And thanks very much for listening to this talk.
So, thank you, Nathan, for that marvelous presentation. I am Amy Moorcroft. I am here to moderate the Q&A. I myself am a recruiter for Industrial Light and Magic, have been working in the industry for 10 plus years, and I'm very happy to be chatting with Nathan about his work specifically on Scarygirl, but also his career at length, and asking him some questions. So I guess my first question for you, Nathan, would be, obviously you've had this concept of Scarygirl in the works for 20 plus years, which is remarkable. And it was really nice to see that kind of open source vibe that you gave off around your work, which is, seeing it adapted into various different mediums, but also other people taking on that artwork and kind of developing it as well, which is probably a little bit uncommon in the world of content creation, is letting that work kind of go a bit. And so my question is about how, working with Passion Pictures and developing this animated feature, how was it for you sharing your baby, as it were, which is very true because it's based on your baby, Archie, but how was it sharing that kind of your artwork, but also letting other people kind of get involved in that creative process?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I suppose it is kind of like a child in some ways, and it's almost kind of going, all right, babysitters and minders looking after your child, but also, you give your children to a teacher for half a day, and a lot of the influences that teachers give, sort of, I suppose, coat your child, and that's what kind of it develops into. So in some ways, I suppose Scarygirl has been a bit like that, where I've sort of allowed it to kind of have influences from whoever it's being given to, in a sense, and accepting that as though, like, I'm giving it to a teacher, or it's going to a preschool, and then it's going to university, and then it's moving on and on and on. And as it's happening, it's growing, it's getting opinionated in a certain way. sometimes not always maybe exactly the direction you want or the exact result that you want. But it's I don't know why I've been that so much that way with this particular brand in a lot of ways. I think it's just maybe just because I have 3 kids of my own that I'm used to kind of multiple sources of influences happening in real life. So it just seems like it's a natural thing to do with this IP. I think as it gets on though, I think I've got to the point now where I may want to take a bit more control of that sort of thing. I feel like we've done so many things with games, and we've done all these other books and everything, but we haven't. And then films done, and I feel like now, maybe I have the experience and knowledge from all the the past good things and also the past mistakes to go, okay, now I know what I really want to do with it. But it only took 21 years of all these different mediums to kind of work out, all right, yeah, I'd probably like to get more involved in directing, I think would be the next step for Scarygirl, because I feel like I've done a lot of the art and I've put, my efforts into the art, but not so much lately into, what is the story and what is the actual kind of direction. And I think that's, to me, I think the next step. I've allowed this child to be a bit free, and then now it's like, all right, now I better take control a bit more and really work out what I want to do with it.
That's awesome. Yeah. I guess one of my questions as well was about, embarking on a feature film. First of all, I loved seeing that breakdown of the different story points and beats in the different mediums. I thought that was really interesting because obviously I'd seen your illustrative comic book, and it was interesting to see the variations in the story and the process behind that. What was something that you were most excited for in embarking on this animated feature?
I mean, I think one of the big things was the voices. I mean, that's something that we hadn't really experienced Archie, the main character, actually speaking before. I mean, there's been little words here and there, and we did a VR experience where she said a few things, but we haven't really had a proper voice for any of the characters. So to me, it was probably the most exciting thing to actually see characters speak, because the graphic novels, essentially there's no words, it's just sound effects. In the game, the original Flash game, it was all kind of like, emoji type expressions. So I think that was probably the most exciting aspect of it. And also there was a couple of scenes in the film that I really was looking forward to seeing how that was going to play out in the film, especially the section with Tree Dweller in the forest. That was something I was really looking forward to.
Yeah, I love that whole section. I thought the Tempest was a really interesting device that you included in there. I thought it was stunning.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the creation of the animated feature, I mean, obviously we're getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty here, but obviously you had lots of designs that you were forthcoming with in the design of the film. And in all of the different mediums, I guess there's different constraints in what gets created. So if you're creating a vinyl toy, what's the different constraints between that and one with like lots of moving pieces? Maybe I don't really know much about toys. I'm really making that know right now. And again with VR and computer games, like what were some things that really had to change quite a bit in order to fit, say, a 3D animation pipeline or the animation feature creation process itself? And also, were there any happy accidents from going through that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we were looking at the early influences of where the I suppose the IP began, and it began at toys, and it began as a just a very kind of simple single panel comic series that ran for about 30 weeks in a Hong Kong magazine. And a lot of our, I suppose, ways we wanted to do the film was to kind of see what could we do with the constraints of say a vinyl toy, which is that it has certain limited moving parts and has there's a materialism, there's a material aspect about it, even though, yes, collecting lots of things is materialism, but there's a material aspect to the toys that we wanted to recreate. So if it wasn't stretchy, then we didn't want the characters to move in a stretch and squash manner. So we wanted to kind of keep it quite true to that original kind of toy roots. And so in some ways, designing a toy and designing characters of the film were fairly similar. But there were quite a few things where some of the movements of characters you just can't do in a toy. So thinking about more of the joints, especially for say mechanical figures or characters where, the heads are so big that if you move an arm up, it's going to intersect into the head. So the idea of looking at or redesigning the toys in some ways to work as an animated character was a little bit of a challenge because you're never really thinking about as a toy how extreme can you push the toy, whereas with the film we were really looking at, well, what could be the most we could push it without it being wrecking its material aspect, sort of thing. So if it's made of stiff plastic, how much can we push that without it kind of breaking it and turning into kind of a rubbery creature? So in some ways there's similarities, but there was also quite a lot of differences in the sense that we hadn't done a lot of certain aspects of the film as toys before. So like, the Tempest, for instance, as you were mentioning, I mean, that's something that we had a leaf design before, but we never thought about how could this whole thing be a kind of a creature and how could a whole pile of leaves kind of form this character. That was kind of a real challenge because we were we had such a small kind of R&D VFX team. I mean, most of the VFX was just done by one person for the whole film. So we were like, I mean, it was a very big challenge for them. And so it was myself, the art director, and the VFX guy, really just looking at like what could be the way that this could be formed, this Tempest character, and that challenge was seen in a lot of different aspects of the film. Probably the happy accident probably was that Tempest. Actually, at first it was like we were all pretty afraid of that because it is how do you make it look a little bit stop motiony looking, and quite tactile, but also be very have a lot of action and movement to this creature. And so just through some experiments, I think I'm trying to work out there might have been a program of having the leaves spin around in a certain direction that made a happy accident that it looked like it was kind of constantly swirling. Some of the tech side of things eludes me a bit, but it's generally I think that was the happy accident of the film, was looking at it going, oh wow, that actually looks really cool. I think we should just keep it. There was probably something else in there that was a nice happy accident. It might have been the dream sequence as well, that where she's she goes into the mouth of the tree. There's sort of some interesting kind of distortion and sounds and stuff that we were just that were being messed with, and it kind of did create a really nice kind of otherworldly look. And I think that was just through some R&D and probably some like, hey, why don't we just try this effect? And it was like, oh, whoa, that actually looks really good. It keeps it different to say the flashback, which is that 2D flashback later on in the film, and it keeps it as its own separate thing, and it makes it stand out from the rest of the film in the sense that it feels like a dream, but it doesn't take it so far that it feels like it's a totally different style, which is what the flashback 2D flashback sequence does. So yeah, there's lots of things about the film that were a lot of experimenting, but we knew where our roots were, which is the vinyl toys were the roots of the whole film.
That's so interesting that you say that, because there's so many animated features that hope one day to get their own toy collection come from the success of the animated feature, whereas you had that to start with, which is probably not the common route. So that's pretty cool. And you mentioned there about wanting the Tempest to look a bit stop motion-y. Was that you mentioned as well your influences, with Worf and Harryhausen being stop motion as well. Did you want the look of the animated feature to be quite stop motion-y, or was it more a development that came through working with these other creatives on the project? Like, how do you want this film to look? How do we want this film to look? Was that a goal for the production?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that, initially we actually, quite a few years ago wanted to be stop motion. I mean, that was something that we were, that would have been my first choice, is stop motion. But, on a time and budget constraint, it's just something that we just couldn't do. So there was always an idea of doing it kind of in a stop motion like look, and everything was done on twos to give it kind of a bit more of a sort of a slightly more stepped kind of style about it. And also because it was based on this, kind of tactile toy kind of world, then it made sense to kind of maybe push that stop motion feel a bit more. So yeah, with all those kind of influences and the added idea that we wanted it to feel tactile and like a kind of almost a toy world, that bringing the stop motion aspect to it made sense. And it was one of those weird ones where it was kind of like, discussing with the directors, like, how far do we want to push the stop motion? And I think, it probably, if it was like maybe if it was a short film, maybe we could have pushed it even really extreme and had it like, ultra staggery and really kind of almost naive. But then there was a little bit of a back and forth of how far do we want to push the stop motion feel about it. And so we got kind of a stop motion-ish kind of feel. But yeah, probably if I was to do a short film version of Scarygirl, I'd probably go even like, what is it? Is it fours or whatever? I don't know. It's just like really staggery and it really pushed the tilt shift. So it's almost kind of like super miniatures and everything's a bit more really staggery. But yeah, there's just a little bit of pushback on like, would an audience who doesn't really know much about animation go, oh, everything looks broken, what is this sort of thing? So, you've obviously got opinions from people who need it to be a little bit commercial, and then the other people who are like, how artistic can we get it? Yeah.
It definitely came across in the film. It's one of the first things that I noticed about it. I was like, oh, it's a bit stop motion here. Quite like that. Yeah. And does come across really tactile. So that's wonderful that, you were able to achieve that goal somewhat as you could. My next question was, you mentioned it briefly, but, we've got comic books, toys, games, VR, now this animated feature. What is next for Scarygirl? And does that mean, you mentioned about being maybe directing, do you think there's going to be a Scarygirl 2?
Well, we are looking at doing a TV kind of spin-off sort of thing. So it'd be kind of, I think the idea is that it would be in a similar style to the film. And then it would be almost like, what happens to Archie now that, there's this power vacuum in the city, Dr. Maybe's off mysteriously somewhere, who's looking after the city? It's essentially Archie's saved the whole kind of world and the city. So therefore, is she kind of maybe seen as someone that's famous? Maybe she's kind of got a bit of a celebrity status. What happens to a young teen when they're thrust now into the limelight as, as someone that's done something quite big for a huge population. So there could be that's sort of something that we're exploring and discussing at the moment. I personally would love to try and explore more of some of the side characters, and it might be something that we could do together. Maybe it's something where we've got this spin-off, but I'd love to kind of explore, like Tree Dweller, like what's Tree Dweller's kind of backstory in life. Maybe it's something that's very separate to the film, or like Bunny Guru and Egg. Like what is their history? What would be their whole life? Like, or maybe it's not even them; it's their relatives. What would be a kind of a whole world and a backstory that's maybe done in a totally different style. I'd love to go back to like 2D. That's something that I started off with years ago, just as working in Flash and stuff. And I'd love to kind of maybe just go something very, I don't know, more whimsical and beautiful and a little bit more kind of Miyazaki meets something else kind of, that kind of more, I don't know. I just feel like I'd like to maybe be involved in maybe the direction of something that's almost like a separate entity to the Scarygirl main story.
That's great. Yeah, I love all of those ideas. Sign me up. My last question for you is kind of more holistically looking at your career and the development of your concepts. And if you have, we have a lot of budding animators, but also people who are developing their own creative ideas out there. And if you have any advice that you would give to someone developing their own intellectual property and wanting to achieve a similar level of success as you have found.
I mean, it's always hard to know exactly what success is, but as far as like developing your own IP and sort of continuing with it, I think what gave me the kind of the motivation, maybe the longevity of it, is that it's related to something that's personal to me. So I think that's one thing, that if you're going to do something that you actually are personally invested in, that maybe comes from either personal experience or it comes from something that you've been obsessed with for a long time, latch onto those elements, because that's what's going to make it, I suppose, authentic to you. And in some ways, maybe people will be able to see that authentic aspect of the thing that you're creating. So, for me, obviously, in the talk, you can see that, Scarygirl was based on my daughter. There's things that I was passionate about when I was in my 20s that I really loved, that I wanted to infuse into the work. And I think that's the passion, and that's what drove me to kind of continue with the IPs, because I love what I'm doing. I can relate to it. I have things that I can go back into my memory or into my actual just daily personal experience that I can bring into the IP. So I think that's the main thing. There's certain things in my background in Lithuania, Latvia, that I can kind of mine. There's stuff from Australia, stuff from Canada. I can grab it all and kind of bring it into my storytelling. So if you've got that in your life, if you've got things that you can write about that's about your family or about your friends or where you live, so much easier to do that than kind of take it from someone else's ideas or story or culture. It's better to kind of have it coming from your internal experiences and background.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, that's all of my questions. Thank you so much for your time, Nathan, for this fantastic presentation and for putting out this really great story into the world and all of its other what is the word that I'm looking for? All of its other tendrils.
Iterations. Yes, tendrils. Yes. I like the tendrils. Yes, tentacles.
Tentacles.
Yeah.
Yes, tentacles. Absolutely.
Yep.
No, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.